Hello, and welcome to another episode of Street Level Marketing with your host, Mark Lamplugh. We have a pretty good show for you this evening today. I have Maxwell Pollock. He's a content and messaging expert. Maxwell, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mark.
I wanted to bring you on and talk about, content. I think now, this day and age, with social media and, how fast the world moves, you kind of, I think I saw something where Gary V had talked about you needing like 200 pieces of content a day to keep engaged with your audience. And so now with, I think, all the AI tools and things like that, it makes it a little bit easier for businesses to create that content. Talking about in this, our first segment here, talking about the foundations of content, that resonates. What are the key elements of content that grabs attention in marketing campaigns?
Yeah, it's so funny you just mentioned Gary Vee and sort of like the amount of touch points people need to convert, right? I mean, I've seen 200, I've seen 50. I think 200 might be a little bit overkill, but
Yeah.
if I see 200 pieces of content in a day, I'm done. I'm going to sleep. Yeah, content that really resonates helps address a challenge. It helps address a pain point, right? Good content starts with pain. So oftentimes it's not about the content format. The content format is important, channels are important, but if your message sucks, right? Like if it doesn't really address a real challenge that people are facing, it's not going to land very well. So no matter how much ad spend you put in there, no matter how much money you pump into a campaign, if the messaging is off, people pick up on it. People are smart, right? And people are intuitive as well. So if they're not feeling your messaging, they're not going to buy from you, quite frankly. So what is that too? Underlying all of that, underlying the warm and fuzzy is trust. People have to trust that whatever product they're going to buy from you or solution or service is going to do what it says do what you say it's going to do, but also deliver on something that's reliable and there's some sort of outcome or light at the end of the tunnel that they can envision. So really content that resonates, it starts with that pain and it also delivers a relatable context, right? So a lot of people, a lot of marketers, especially in the B2C area, now I'm technically from the B2B, but it's the same in B2C too. People focus on the hook instead of really focusing on the context of the hook, right? So yeah, I mean, there are different, examples of that in the wild. And I just saw an example from TurboTax the other day. And it really caught my eye caught my ear rather. It was sort of on, while I was streaming music on Spotify, but this guy's voice comes in and goes, taxes is, and my copy brain, just went wild. Taxes is a plural noun, and it's a taxes are. And then I thought about it. No, forget that. It's not about that. They're doing that on purpose because it's approachable and it's conversational. And taxes is a concept, right? It's an activity as well, doing your taxes, right? They don't have to say doing your taxes is, they can just say taxes is. And what else is approachable and conversational? What else is easy to use, easy to approach? TurboTax. So it was a perfect, message delivery because they nailed the context of their product. And they also nailed the audience that they were trying to reach.
Yeah. So how do you balance authenticity and persuasion when crafting messages, for a local audience?
Yeah, for a local audience, that's really interesting. I'm in the South Jersey area, and close enough to Philadelphia, right? And I think there's this lawyer named John Morgan, and it's so funny. Like his billboard, instead of writing his name out as John John, it's JAWN Morgan, right? And I'd assume a tourist, just driving through Philly might be like, why is his name spelled that way? That's so weird, right? But if you're from Philly or South Jersey or even the tri-state area, you're gonna go, oh, that's Philly slang. That's totally Philadelphia right there. So John Morgan his team knew what they were doing when they put up that ad, right? And so they did their research. They know about local customs in the area, and they develop something that really resonated, and it's funny, and it catches your eye in like 3 seconds or less, right? And that's another key point of making sure you're advertising correctly. But I think, to go back to your original point, the underlying theme of that is know your market. Like, know the locality in which you're operating. That can include, cultural competency research. Go to where people are and ask them questions, right? It could include market research. You could do a more formal survey. You could hire a couple of teenagers to stand on a street corner and ask people questions, and film a TikTok and then learn from that. So there are a lot of different ways where you can learn about what your local market needs. And then the other, of course, at end of this is Google, because most people are typing into Google, Thai restaurant near me, or Italian restaurant near me, or pizza near me, right? Plumber near me. And so if you can kind of understand, what people are searching for on Google in your area, through usually a research tool like SEMrush, or you can even just go into Google and just do your research there. I mean, Google is almost like an SEO tool in itself, because it wrote the book and because it's the engine itself, right? So those two things I would say are really important. That knowing the local customs, knowing the local lingo, knowing how people speak, and then reflecting that in your messaging. Speak like the local people speak, right? And then number two, doing your research, under the hood. So making sure you're, doing your keyword research and understanding where your local opportunities to seize that market exist.
It's speaking of Philadelphia, I'm from just outside Philadelphia too.
Nice.
And growing up as a kid, there was an attorney that always had advertisements on TV. It was Alan Rothenberg, the injury lawyer.
Yeah.
To this day, and I'm talking 30 years later, I still remember the phone number.
Yeah.
To his, I could call him now, and I haven't seen his in 20 years.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
So
just goes to show you it works.
Yep. So what role does storytelling play, in making content memorable?
Everything. The story is what people will remember. And, obviously there are a lot of way more famous marketers than I am, and more way more reputable, like Simon Sinek, right? Start with the why, right? Like, what you're not selling your product or service. That's what you happen to do, right? That's what you do is your product or service. That's not why you're doing what you're doing. So you need to make that very explicit in your story. It's one thing to say, this is a very famous example, but Apple, has been pretty genius at marketing their products. I think we can all agree on that. But one thing, when they rolled out the iPod, they didn't say, hey, it holds, 3 gigabytes of memory, right? They said 10,000 songs in your pocket.
Yeah.
Right. That's what you care about. Like, that's the why behind why they invented the iPod, is to give you convenience to stream, to music, to listening to music. So, or, ingesting media. So again, why is your brand doing what it's doing? Tell that story. What's the why behind your product? If you can unpack that in an advertisement, for instance, like that, iPod example, that's a great way to do it. Same thing with public health, or, it's kind of a similar format. It's one thing to say, nobody has time for diabetes, right? That's a better way than saying, like, manage your blood sugar. It's like, they're different frames that you can, there are always going to be infinite frames for your story, but the why of, like, time, I think people really treasure their time in general, right? So if you can hit them with a more important why in that messaging, and then relate it back to your brand or relate it back to your mission, you're going to succeed 9 times out of 10.
How do you adapt content to different cultural and neighborhood, like different neighborhood vibes?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think it's becoming more and more important too. I mean, I gave you the example of Philadelphia. That's, obviously using the jargon of the area is really important for that. But you have to know first what people are going through in that neighborhood, right? Or going through in that community. And you can do your research on that. I mean, let's take the legal example again, right? It's like, if you notice a surge in car crashes in this one city or one area, and you cover, injury law, you probably don't want to put up advertisements about, workplace injuries. You probably want to put up advertisements about auto injury, right? And we'll get you compensated for your auto injury. So I think, doing your research is really important. And where do you start with that? I think you start with talking with people. You can also do market research, and then you can also do your statistical research on the back end. Obviously, with AI tools that we have now, like Perplexity is a really great one for research. You can surface these insights quite easily. So it's all available. It's just about putting two and two together and then making sure you're crafting messaging that's going to resonate with those audiences. And then the most important part is to verify that messaging is actually working and converting.
Well, we'll come up to the end of this first segment.
Cool.
We're going to go to a commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about messaging strategies that drive a great engagement.
Sounds great.